Prince Louis didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't even move. Not when the man's hand clamped over his mouth and began dragging him through the crowd. To anyone watching, it looked ordinary. A relative, a tourist, a helpful adult guiding a nervous child away from the noise. But just steps away, a white van waited at the curb, and a boy was seconds from vanishing. In that moment, surrounded by cameras, tourists, and tradition, he remembered what they taught him in school. He raised one hand, palm open, thumb in, fingers folded, a secret signal. And across the forecourt, a royal guard saw it. He didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for orders. He broke centuries of protocol and sprinted straight into the crowd. Before we show you exactly what happened, make sure you're subscribed to our channel, Crown Guard, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The thing about Buckingham Palace is that it breathes differently than anywhere else in London, even when tourists pack against the black iron railings 3 deep. Their voices drop to whispers without anyone telling them to. Something about those ancient cobblestones just swallows sound, holds it, makes everything feel heavier with history. Today, the morning sun was being particularly generous, turning the cream-colored stone into something that almost glowed from within. The kind of light that makes people pause mid-conversation and fumble for their phones without really knowing why. Brass fittings caught and threw back gold fire. The scarlet tunics of the guards burned like signal flares against all that pale elegance. From somewhere deep in the courtyard came the warm-up calls of the regimental band, French horns calling to each other across the square in notes so deep they seemed to rise from the stones themselves. The ceremony would start soon, and everyone could feel it building. Lance Corporal Mason Ward felt it too, but not the same way the tourists did. At 31, he'd been standing guard long enough to know that the most beautiful moments were often when the worst things happened. Afghanistan had taught him that. 2 tours in Helmand province had burned a simple truth into his bones. When everyone else is watching the show, predators make their move. His left knee gave him a twinge where the shrapnel had found its mark during his last patrol. The injury that had eventually brought him home to ceremonial duty. Some of his mates saw it as a step down from real soldiering. Mason knew better. The threats were just dressed differently here. Standing motionless for hours was its own kind of combat, and Mason had learned to use every second of it. His eyes never stopped working beneath the shadow of his bearskin hat. Left to right, pause, right to left. Cataloging faces, tracking movement patterns, noting the tiny things that might matter when seconds counted. He developed a system over the months. Green light, tourists being tourists. Yellow light, something worth watching. Red light, threat confirmed, decision time. Today, he'd been running mostly green since dawn until the yellows started appearing. 2 men who'd been positioned near the same barrier for over 40 minutes. Neither had taken a single photograph. Everyone took photos. Everyone. And they'd been studying the royal viewing section with particular attention, measuring response times with synchronized movements. Mason's grip on his rifle stock tightened. The weapon might look ceremonial to everyone else, but his muscle memory knew exactly how fast it could become something deadly serious. In Helmand, hesitation had meant body bags. Here, it might mean something worse. Protocol kept his boots locked to the ancient stone, though, until he had more than gut feeling, until he could prove rather than just sense danger. Tradition demanded he stay exactly where duty had placed him for the last 300 years, but his eyes never stopped tracking. The taller of the 2 men was mid-40s, Mason estimated. Good physical condition, moved like someone who'd spent time in uniform. Military bearing never really left a man, even when he was trying to hide it. The shorter one was different, softer around the middle, but his eyes were sharper. The planner, maybe the brains. They'd been studying the royal viewing section with particular attention. Not the guards, not the ceremony preparations, but the space where family members stood during events. The angles, the sight lines, the distances from security positions. Mason felt the familiar tightness in his chest that had kept him alive in places where carelessness meant death. These weren't random threats. This was reconnaissance. Then he noticed something that made his blood turn cold. Hidden cameras, not phones. Everyone had phones. These were smaller, more sophisticated button cameras. Probably professional surveillance equipment documenting everything for weeks of reconnaissance. His answer came 20 minutes later when the royal party began taking their positions. Princess Charlotte appeared first, escorted by her governess and 2 protection officers. Even at 10 years old, she carried herself with the natural poise that marked her as unmistakably royal. The crowds pressed closer to the barriers, phones rising like salutes. Then came the Duchess, moving with practiced grace toward the main viewing platform. More phones, more excited whispers from the crowd. And finally, Prince Louis, 7 years old and still young enough to be excited by all the pageantry. His handler, a palace aide named Mason, guided him toward a position where the band was setting up. "Stay near the band. Your mother will be back in a bit." Mason watched the 2 men's body language change the moment Louis appeared. The casual tourist poses disappeared. Their positioning shifted subtly but significantly. Now they formed brackets around the approach routes to the boy's position. This wasn't random surveillance anymore. This was target acquisition. The taller man moved first. He'd been playing the part perfectly for over an hour now. Windbreaker jacket, faded jeans, tourist camera hanging from his neck. In his hands, a cardboard box from some duty-free shop with a generic toy drone logo splashed across it. The perfect prop for approaching a child. But Mason could see through the performance now. The way he held the box, handle angled wrong for something heavy. The way his jacket hung, weighted on the right side, where something substantial was concealed. The way his eyes tracked exit routes instead of admiring the ceremony everyone else was watching. This was a professional operator running a textbook approach. Mason's heart rate spiked, but his breathing stayed controlled. He'd learned that rhythm in Afghanistan. When your body wanted to flood with adrenaline, you forced it to stay tactical instead. Panic was the enemy. Precision was survival. He watched the man check his phone, not reading messages, but checking the time, synchronizing. The shorter accomplice adjusted his position accordingly, moving to cut off the most obvious escape route if anything went wrong. But they hadn't counted on one variable. A royal guard who'd spent 2 tours learning to read the subtle signs that separated ordinary people from those who meant harm. Mason began calculating angles, distances, response times. His ceremonial position put him roughly 30 feet from Prince Louis. Good sprint distance if he could get clear of the crowd. The barrier between them was ceremonial rope, not a real obstacle. The kidnappers, and that's what they had to be, were positioned for extraction toward the east gate. Beyond the palace walls, he'd bet everything he owned there was a vehicle waiting, engine running, driver ready. The setup was professional, patient, and about to be executed. The taller man approached Prince Louis with the measured confidence of someone who'd done this before. Different targets, maybe different countries, but the fundamentals were always the same. Identify the weakness, exploit the moment, execute the plan. "Hey there, mate," he said, bending down to Louis's level with the warm tones of any helpful adult. "Got something special for you." The drone box looked official, new, tagged. Exactly the kind of gift that might be part of the royal experience. Louis turned toward the voice, naturally curious, but not alarmed. After all, adults approached him with gifts all the time. It was part of being who he was. "Is it from the ceremony?" Louis asked politely, the way he'd been taught. "Something like that," the man replied, his smile perfectly calibrated. "Your mom said you'd like it." That was the hook. The mention of his mother. Children trusted authority figures who seemed to know their parents. It was basic psychology, and it worked. Louis stepped closer to examine the box, and that's when everything changed. In one fluid motion, practiced, professional, inevitable, the man dropped the empty box and wrapped his arm around the boy's small frame. Not violent, not dramatic. To anyone watching casually, It looked like an affectionate relative comforting an excited child. His hand covered Louis's mouth gently but completely, while his voice whispered with apparent kindness. But the words were poison disguised as comfort. "Listen very carefully," he said softly, mouth close to Louis's ear. "I know exactly where your sister Charlotte is right now. I know where your mother is. If you make any sound, any trouble at all, they get hurt instead of you. Do you understand me?" Louis went rigid, his 7-year-old mind processing a threat so far beyond his experience that for a moment he couldn't even think. The man's grip wasn't hurting him, but it was absolute and inescapable. "Just nod if you understand," the man continued. "We're going to walk very quietly to see some nice people who want to meet you. No fuss, no noise. Your family stays safe that way." Through his terror, Louis managed to nod. The man's smile returned. "Good boy. Now we walk." They moved carefully through the crowd, every step measured, the accomplice falling in beside them like family. Tourists snapped selfies. Children pointed at the guards. The chaos of a Tuesday morning masked what was happening. Mason tracked them, alarm mounting. They were heading for the east gate. Beyond it, a white panel van idled where no civilian vehicle should be. This wasn't chance. It was a professional extraction, planned for weeks, maybe months. That's when Prince Louis did something unforgettable. He didn't scream, he didn't struggle. He remembered his training. The silent distress signal. Palm open, thumb folded, fingers curled inward. A universal plea for help. Within 20 feet of Mason, the boy raised his hand as if brushing away hair, but the movement was deliberate. Mason saw it, and every alarm bell went off. Protocol or protection, tradition or humanity. He chose. The explosion of boots against cobblestone shattered centuries of silence. In 362 years, no guard had ever broken formation. Until now. Mason sprinted, scarlet tunic blazing. The kidnapper froze, mask slipping. His grip shifted, a concealed knife flashing into view. "Stay back!" he snarled, blade pressed to Louis's ribs. The accomplice moved into flanking position. 2 men, 1 child, civilians everywhere. Mason dropped his rifle. The kidnappers glanced down. That instant was all he needed. His hand twisted the knife away, pulling Louis behind him. An elbow strike felled the accomplice. A fist and knee combination dropped the primary kidnapper. In 15 seconds, it was over. Screams erupted, phones recorded, palace security stormed in, armed police secured the attackers. Inside the van, investigators found restraints, sedatives, and documents. Proof this was an international trafficking operation. Months of planning had targeted a 7-year-old boy. Hours later, Mason stood in an oak-paneled room before Major Harwood and senior officials. His report was precise, stripped of emotion. "The child's distress signal was direct evidence, sir. It justified abandoning protocol. Harwood studied him. Protocol exists to serve duty, not the other way around," Mason added firmly. A thin smile crossed the Major's lips. Wisdom or insubordination, perhaps both. The door opened. Prince Louis entered with the Princess of Wales. "This man saved my son's life," she said. Louis stepped forward, voice clear. "Tell them about the signal." Mason's throat tightened as the boy handed him a drawing, a guardsman running toward a child in blue. Beneath it, in careful handwriting, "Thank you for seeing my signal." Later, in his quarters, Mason pinned the drawing beside medals and photos of fallen comrades. Unlike those, this wasn't about abstract duty or service. It was about a child in danger, a signal in the crowd, and the choice to act. The aftermath reshaped everything. Security protocols were revised, training expanded. Mason was quietly reassigned to a role where instinct mattered more than ceremony. The kidnappers disappeared into secure facilities, answering for crimes that spanned borders. Weeks later, at another ceremony, Prince Louis spotted Mason across the grounds. No wave, just a hand to his chest. Mason gave the faintest nod. A silent recognition. Tradition continued. The guards marched, the band played, tourists snapped photos. But now the royal children knew something deeper. Behind ceremony stood people willing to act when rules weren't enough. And that's the real question this story asks. Would you see the signal? Would you recognize the quiet cry for help when no words could be spoken? And if you did, would you have the courage to break the rules to do what was right? Because sometimes the greatest duty isn't following orders. It's protecting those who cannot protect themselves.